Sarah Cahill is a Natural Resources Specialist 2 with the Drinking Water Assessment Team in the Drinking Water Standards section. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from the University of Connecticut. Sarah has worked for TCEQ since 2023, and she conducts public water system compliance from a microbial sampling for the revised Total Coliform Rule Program. Our second speaker is Kristen Collier. She is a Natural Resources Specialist 5 with the Drinking Water Assessment Team in the Drinking Water Standards section. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Meteorology and a Master's of Science in Atmospheric Sciences from Texas A&M. Kristen joined TCEQ Drinking Water Assessment Team in 2024 after working as the head of water quality for several different public water systems in Central Texas. She conducts public water system compliance under the revised Total Coliform Rule, RTCR. Please welcome Sarah Cahill and Kristen Collier.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for all coming back after lunch. Today we'll be discussing the RTCR coliform sampling, and then I'm going to pass it off to Kristen to discuss the assessment basics. So our overview for today, we're going to discuss the coliform sampling, positive sample results, and what that will look like for your system, repeat sampling, assessment process and how that will look like for your system, the assessment documentation, the TCEQ assessment review process, and some resources at the very end. So for coliform sampling, the goal of the revised Total Coliform Rule is to protect public health by reducing potential pathways for microbial and fecal contamination into the public water systems through the use of total coliforms or E. coli as indicator bacteria to determine the adequacy of water treatment and the integrity of the distribution system. So to prepare for microbial sampling, you want to have some best practices at hand, and that's going to be prepared for that sampling by having a standard operating procedure or an SOP. How is your system collecting it? Are you guys all collecting on the same steps? You'll also want to have a sample siting plan. Where are these locations coming from? Are these predetermined, or are you just going by the seat of your pants? You want to be organized by having a sample kit. Here on the right-hand side is an example of what your kit can look like. It could be anywhere from gloves to disinfectant supplies, cooler, ice packs, you name it. You also want to make sure you're training your staff appropriately, that you're all sampling accordingly and at the same time, or not the same time, but at the same methods, and completing the microbial sampling form. For sample collection SOP, you want to have information on sample site selection, inclement weather protocols, what is your system going to do and how will they respond in the event of inclement weather, preparing the disinfectant tap through flushing or disinfection, pouring residual testing and acceptable levels, completing the microbial form, and sample transportation.
Hi, I'm sorry for interrupting you. My name is Andy Waite. I'm with the TOPS program. I'm a contractor for TCEQ. I don't know if you guys noticed downstairs, I was doing a sampling study downstairs where I try to have people put their finger in the total coliform sample, have them in the back T sample, and have them step on the lid, do all those things that you're not supposed to do. And this is not to imply that you shouldn't follow these protocols that they're going to be going over. It's that if in fact you get a positive, you should really probably think that it's in the water and go right there and go right after it. I managed to get 5 positives out of the 97 samples that I collected. And we didn't do 100 because Andy can't count. But still, if you look at it, right, out of the last 500, I only got 13 positives. This one was good. It was a groundwater system that was just free chlorinating. We'll do it again next year with the surface water, and we'll see how it goes. But the thing is it's not to imply that you should ever not follow a good sampling protocol. It is to imply that if you get a positive, don't try to shoot the sampler, right? That's not what it is. It's 99.999%. It's going to be in the water, and just go right after that. Check all those other things that you should be checking. Thanks for letting me interrupt you. Thanks.
Okay, so just to finish off this slide, this link can take you to an example SOP that TCEQ has. Feel free to visit this link, adopt the interior procedures, compare and contrast what is your system doing compared to what TCEQ is suggesting, and definitely take these suggestions and incorporate it into your system. So next we're going to talk about your sample siting plan. This is a required document by the TAC, and it is something that you should have on your system on site at all times. It is considered a living document, so you need to update it as accordingly. If there's an unfavorable site, why are we sampling there? We should take it off and put a favorable site that is representative of the distribution system. So with that being said, you want to avoid these locations, entry points, dead-end mains, storage tanks, and unoccupied buildings. The reason for entry points and storage tanks, they're going to be at the entry point of your distribution sample system. They're going to be closest to your disinfection equipment, so they're going to have a higher residual. So they're not really going to be representative of your system. And then on the opposite end, dead-end mains and unoccupied buildings, they're farther away from the disinfection facility. They're going to have a lower residual, and they're not, again, representing the system as a whole. You'll also want to include wells if you're a groundwater well system, and these will be the wells that you'll sample from in the event of a positive sample for your triggered source monitoring. If you are a system that has multiple wells or several wells, you may have a triggered source monitoring plan. That is something you'll have to discuss with the groundwater rule team on, and you can contact them with this email here to develop that plan. Another best practice is your lab choice. So as a public water system, you have the choice of working with any NELAP accredited laboratory that works with the TCEQ. If you visit our webpage, the revised total coliform rule, or even the public water system supervision program, at the very bottom, you will find a map. And if you open that map, it takes you to Google, and you can find a laboratory within the area of your system, hopefully within driving distance. You'll want to use an accredited laboratory, and you'll want to have a primary and a backup. And it's important to know to have a backup, because what if your lab is not accepting samples? Not all labs will be accepting samples on Fridays and weekends, and if they do, it may come with additional fees. So just keep that in mind when you are taking your samples to the laboratory and they refuse to accept them. So it's good to have a backup lab to contact and have information from, so you can take those samples with their bottles and have those samples tested for analysis. And of course, these situations can happen. They are typically rare when you're scrambling to find a laboratory. So we always encourage systems to sample early in the month, early in the week, so you can avoid these kind of problems when on a Friday and you're about to leave for vacation. So next, we'll discuss on how to complete the microbial reporting form. As a public water system, your focus is going to be on the left-hand side, or essentially anything with a green header. So at the top, you're going to fill in your PWS information. This is going to be your your public water system name and ID. It can be found on Drinking Water Watch. And a contact information for your lab to report that information to. We also will reference that, so make sure that information is up to date and those voicemails are being checked. Next, we're going to talk for the sample details. On the left-hand side, the sample location. Again, this is coming from your sample siting plan. This is saying that this sample was from a predetermined location because it was on my sample siting plan. Next to that is the sample type. What kind of type of sample are you submitting it for? The date and time of collection, and a measured chlorine residual. That is really important because this column is often missed, and when that's missed, it can lead to sample rejection. At the very bottom, you'll want to include your sampler's information, their phone number, who collected it. If you have a good email, that is also great to include, because then we can give that individual a call and give the necessary guidance on repeat sampling. The very bottom for drop-off details, this is crucial. If you miss this section, the samples will be deemed for rejection. A signature, a date, and a time is required for sample drop-off, and this includes couriers if you use them as well. So now we're discussing CMDP. CMDP is the Compliance Monitoring Data Portal. This is a data portal that TCEQ is rolling out by November 15, 2025 to maintain compliance with EPA's Cromer ruling, which is the cross-media electronic reporting rule. What this means and how this will affect water systems is that labs will no longer be able to submit samples for proposed or inactive systems. If you have an inactive well, the sample will not go through. A proposed system, the data will not go through. So it's important to know the status of your system and your facility by checking Drinking Water Watch and confirming that the information that we have is the current information that you have. If there is any discrepancies, definitely give our inventory and data management team a call, or you can contact them at this email to make any updates and corrections. I will also add that Drinking Water Watch is transitioning into Drinking Water Viewer. Hopefully some of you got a chance to view that panel and got to learn more about that information in the next coming months. If you are submitting samples for a plan request or for a different program area, again, your lab will not be able to submit that data if it's for an inactive or proposed facility. They will return that data to the system, and it will be up to the system and their responsibility to deliver that data to the program area. To learn more information about CMDP, you can visit this link here. It will take you to the Public Water System Supervision Program. There's a ton of resources on that webpage where you can learn more about CMDP, how it's affecting the laboratories, and how it may affect your system. So now that you have a completed MRF, you always want to double check your forms to make sure all is accurate. Remember, you are acknowledging to this statement. It is a form, it is a legal document, it is a TCQ document, so you want to make sure the information on there is accurate and present. Hopefully you all got a chance to visit the common mistakes when completing the MRF or workshop, and you got to learn some more about some common mistakes that occur on the microbial form and how to avoid them. Just to name a few, a common one is the sample type. So non-compliant samples and compliant samples, that is not a deemable correction, just because it can affect the integrity of the sample. Another one is the PWS information, sampler information, collection date and time, chlorine residual and type. Those are errors that we see often, so just be mindful before returning in that form to the laboratory. Any corrections after incubation will require TCQ approval, and if you are ever unsure, definitely give us a call and we can discuss if it is correction worth. So now we'll discuss the positive sample results and what that will look like for your system if you were to receive a positive sample. The lab's responsibility is to notify the system by phone and submit the form to them as well, and then notify TCQ by email. Once you have that information from your laboratory, be sure your contacts are up to date. TCQ might be getting a hold of you to give that guidance and share what the next steps are for repeat process. Check your voicemails, and then take action ASAP. Of course, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to give us a call. So if bacteria is present in the water sample, there is potential, it's a sign for potential contamination. So the types of analytes that we use is total coliform and E. coli. And as we see here, the top row, the sample is positive for total coliform and positive for E. coli, and repeat sampling is required. The bottom row is showing that the sample is positive for total coliform, but absent for E. coli. There's some potential contamination, and repeat sampling is required. So the purpose of it is definitely to investigate and determine through the use of sampling. So on this chart, we can see when we need to have that resampling for repeats. All routine positive samples always need repeats. If you collected a positive repeat sample, if the system has not been triggered in assessment, then additional repeats are required. For raw well sampling, if you collected a total coliform positive raw well, additional sampling is not required. For a special sample, if it is being used to lift a boil water notice, then additional sampling is required and would be marked as special on the form. If it is just being used for process control, it is recommended and you should go back out there to collect more samples to determine the issue. Now for E. coli samples, again, like I said, all routine positive samples, that includes E. coli, require repeat sampling, and these will be marked as repeat on the form. If you collect a repeat E. coli sample, no further sampling is required, and an EMCL, or E. coli maximum contaminant level, will be issued to the system, and we'll discuss in the next few slides on what that may look like. For raw well sampling, there are additional actions required for the system. Groundwater Rule will give you a call and give you those additional actions, but if you do have questions, again, you can always give them an email, send them an email to the one listed here. For special samples, again, if it's being used for lift boil water notice, additional sampling is required. This will be marked as special on the form. If it is just for process control, the system should go back out and collect and investigate the issue. So these are the different types of scenarios in the event that the system has triggered an EMCL, or the E. coli maximum contaminant level. So you can see there's a lot of possibilities where the system may be in that situation, but we'll be there alongside you. We'll walk the road with you. We'll give you the guidance. We definitely want to make sure you have all the right information so you're not going through it alone. Anytime our team gets an E. coli, we are on the phone at the ready calling the system, giving those instructions and guidance. So an EMCL is acute health hazard and may indicate sanitary defect. So when an EMCL is issued to the system has to post a boil water notice within 24 hours and deliver that notice and certificate of delivery to TCEQ. In order to rescind that boil water notice, the system has to collect special samples with negative results. And on top of that, the system has to submit the immediate notification, water notification. It's an online form that systems have to submit whenever they're posting for boil water notice, water outages. There's other information regarding that, but it's definitely for boil water notice. Additionally, a violation will be issued to the system and a public notice is required. And lastly, a level 2 assessment will be issued to the system in this exceedance where a TWR, the Texas Rural Water Association, I always get those mixed up, will be assigned to your system to help complete that assessment through the FMT program. So we want to avoid positives at all costs. So by maintaining good systems operations and knowing your disinfectant residuals and maintaining those residual levels, repairing any leaks as soon as possible, and being aware of your system and its condition. Are there parts that are starting to rust out? We should probably go replace them and making sure we're not exposing the water to some external contamination. Following a flushing schedule as well to prevent stagnant water, and then following your SOP and SSPs by not sampling or by avoiding unfavorable conditions and sampling at locations that are representative of your system, and then training your staff as well. Take your time, don't rush, sample early in the month, early in the week, to give yourself ample time to react in the event of a positive water sample. So now for repeat sampling. Again, like I said, the purpose is to investigate the potential contamination. Is it coming from an external source? Is it an impacted area, or is the location itself compromised? We'll discuss the requirements for that sampling, but again, like I said, it's just to investigate the issue and how we can remediate the issue. So within 24 hours notification of your lab for the routine positive sample, you'll want to collect 3 repeats, again, using your sample siting plan. These will have the locations that your system will be sampling those repeats from, 1 at the original positive site, 1 upstream within 5 connections, and 1 downstream within 5 connections. These will all be marked as repeat on the form. And then if you have the original positive ID number, that is something you can obtain from your laboratory or from Drinking Water Watch. That is going to be on the far column right before the lab's analysis marks go in. If you don't have any up or down streams, or if you are a water hauler, definitely give us a call. You can meet us at the TA table. We can discuss the requirements and the guidance on that. These samples must be collected on the same day, and if any of them were to be rejected by the lab, you'll have to collect a replacement sample for the one that was rejected within 24 hours. And just remember, repeat positives may require additional repeats if an assessment has not been triggered. So for groundwater rule, if you do have wells, you may be required to collect triggered source monitoring samples, or known as TSMs. These are also going to be collected within the same 24 hours as your repeats after the distribution positive sample, and these will be collected from each active well according to your sample siting plan. Again, if you have several wells, this may be according to your triggered source monitoring plan, but if you are a smaller system with 1 or 2 wells, this information should be listed on your SSP. If you don't have any active wells, you'll have to fill out the inactive well notification form, or the TCQ form 20891, and submit that to the groundwater rule team so they can be aware of that, and you can avoid any further compliance actions in the event that they notice you didn't collect from the raw well. If your system has 2 or multiple wells and you collect 2 routine positive samples, you are required to collect TSM samples for each and every active well. So let's say in this example, this public water system has 2 routine positives and 2 well sites, well A and B. The PWS will collect 2 raw wells at well A and 2 raw wells at well B for a total of 4 raw well samples, in addition to the repeat sampling. So this is what your form will look like when you're completing your repeats. So you can see here the top 3 samples. They have the upstream, the original, and the downstream, all according to their sample siting plan. These are marked as repeat on the form. They have the date and time of collection, and a measured chlorine residual. The bottom two samples, these are our groundwater well samples. It's going to have the letter G followed by your 7-digit PWS ID number. This can be found on Drinking Water Watch as well, followed by a letter. And again, this can be found on Drinking Water Watch under your Facilities tab. There's also a reference on the very top header. Again, this is just an example, but it is a good reference to kind of remember the lettering and the coding of your well source ID number. These samples are marked as raw well on the sample type, collected date and time collection, and then a measured chlorine residual. This is that far column I was talking about, the original sample ID information. This information you can find from Drinking Water Watch. This is the lab ID number and the date of the collection, or you can obtain it from your laboratory. For well sampling, you don't want to leave it blank. You don't want to put an NA. You don't want to put a slash. Those kinds of errors can lead to sample rejection, so you always want to have a measured chlorine residual for the groundwater well chlorine type column. So if you are a system that collects fewer than 40 samples per month, this is how your repeat process will go. As we see here on the left-hand side, the system collected a positive sample at site A. They collected all 3 repeats within 24 hours, achieved negative results. No further sampling is required, and no assessment has been issued. On the right-hand side, we can see that the system collected, again, at site A. However, they collected positive repeat results. Unfortunately, treatment technique has been exceeded and assessment has been issued to the system. Again, no further sampling is required. If you are a system that collects 40 or more samples per month, this is how the repeat process may go for yours. Of course, it depends on the results. This is just an example. The purpose of this is we want to make sure we have negative results. So the system will continue collecting repeats until they achieve negative results. So for our example, they collected at site A. For the repeat set 1, they collected positive results. They have to go back out and collect the same set of repeats for set 2. Unfortunately, in this example, they collected another set of repeats, and they will continue to collect repeats until a treatment technique has been exceeded and assessment will be issued. In this case, the system did not exceed any treatment, so they are able to continue to collect repeats, achieving those negative results and avoiding an assessment. So now I'm going to pass it off to Kristen, and she'll discuss the assessment process.
So as Sarah mentioned, positive, routine, and repeat samples may be followed up by a level 1 or a level 2 assessment. And an assessment is just a find and fix exercise for a public water system to identify the cause of positive samples so repairs and improvements can be made to protect the distribution system and public health moving forward. This is accomplished by identifying any sanitary defects the system may have. This could be a physical or a treatment defect, which can allow microbial contaminants to enter the distribution system. Once an assessment is triggered, a system has 30 days from the date of that trigger to submit responses to TCEQ. If the assessment is not submitted, the system will receive a violation for failing to complete the requirement. All right, so there are several ways an assessment can be triggered. A level 1 assessment can be triggered by not collecting repeat samples, failing to collect repeat samples within 24 hours of positive sample notification, or by collecting an incomplete set of repeat samples. So for example, only collecting 1 of the 3 required repeats. So I just want to pause here to emphasize that it's very important to collect repeat samples appropriately. If you ever have questions about the process, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to go through it with you so you can avoid getting an assessment. A level 1 assessment can also be triggered by collecting multiple total coliform positive samples, and this is based on population, kind of what Sarah was just describing. For smaller systems, multiple total coliform positive routine distribution system samples will trigger a level 1 assessment. For larger systems, or those that collect 40 or more samples per month, a 5% positivity rate of all routine distribution system samples will trigger a level 1 assessment. A level 2 assessment will be triggered if a system triggers a second level 1 assessment within a rolling 12-month period, or if the system exceeds the E. coli maximum contaminant level. I just wanted to show this graph of the number of level 1 assessments that were triggered in 2024, and just point out we tend to see more assessments triggered in those warmer, rainier months, where bacteria is more likely to start growing. All right, and now we will move on to the documents required for an assessment. When an assessment's triggered, there will be a specific form to fill out based on the type of assessment that has been triggered. Here we just have an example of one section of the assessment, specifically coliform sample sites. On the left is a level 1, on the right is a level 2, and this is just to illustrate that that level 2 assessment will be a lot more detailed and in-depth than a level 1. And an FMT contractor will actually be going out to the system to help go through that level 2 assessment process because it's so detailed. As you're filling out the assessment, whether it is a level 1 or a level 2, please make sure you're responding to all of the applicable questions and sections and reading each question very carefully to make sure you're submitting accurate responses. Any adverse responses or skipped questions may result in some outreach from us so we can clarify what's going on. So if you want to avoid hearing from us a little more, just make sure you're reading extra careful, answering things appropriately. In addition to yes and no questions that we saw on the previous slide, there are also some opportunities on the assessment form where you can have some open-ended responses and tell us what's going on with your system. So here we see one of those examples, the level 1 assessment, where you can identify a sanitary defect that you noted while going through the assessment process. At the top, there's a blank space to describe what's going on in the system. It's important to include dates. We're mainly interested in when was the system identified, when did it start, when was it corrected, if it hasn't been corrected, when is it intended to be corrected, and then any corrective action that has been taken or is planned. Just help paint a better picture so we can understand what's going on and help you. Okay, so when you're ready to submit the assessment, the required documents to submit are the signed and completed assessment form, the Coliform Sample Collection Standard Operating Procedures, or SOP, 2 months of disinfectant residual records leading up to the triggering event, the sample siting plan for the system, and any other relevant information. And this relevant information can be just more information about what's going on in the system, sanitary defects, like I mentioned in that section where you can kind of describe what's going on, corrective action that has already been taken, you can submit work orders, photos, receipts, anything that really just gives us a better idea of what's going on, why positives were being triggered, or why an E. coli was triggered, so that we can better understand what's going on and better help. Now, if the system completes corrective action after the assessment has been submitted, we encourage you to submit those documents to us as soon as possible so that we can close out any items that we've identified in our report. Okay, so here are some common issues we see with assessments. When you're submitting the assessment, please be sure all of the supporting documents are included. This allows us to make a speedier review. Otherwise, we'll be reaching out to gather those additional documents. As mentioned before, you want to make sure that all applicable questions and sections are answered. For some reason, we frequently see section 6 on treatment in the level 1 assessment skipped. No idea why, but if you treat the water, you should be answering that section. There's also a lot of confusion on tank types. Some questions are geared specifically towards pressure tanks. Others are more geared for like a ground storage tank. Make sure you know your facilities and you're answering questions appropriately. If you answer NA to something, that will trigger us to reach out and ask about it. Or if you answer questions for a pressure tank, but we don't see any in the state database, then we'll reach out and ask you, do you have these facilities? As I said, we will reach out for clarification if we do need it, and we just ask that you please be responsive to our phone calls and emails to help speed things up. It's also important to note when you're submitting, a violation may be issued if documents are not received by the due date. All right, so once documents are submitted and received by the drinking water assessment team, the review process will begin. As you can see here, there are a lot of steps to the review process, and the review time can take anywhere from 30 to 90 days. It really just depends on the complexity of the system, how large it is, and then also how much outreach we have to do to gather more documents or ask clarifying questions. But once that review process is completed, the public water system will receive a letter containing their corrective action report plan, or what we refer to as a CARP. There are 3 different types of letters that a system may receive. The first being no sanitary defects have been identified, or a no SD. A letter where sanitary defects have been identified but corrective action has been completed, or a closed SD. And the third being sanitary defects have been identified and have been assigned corrective action deadlines, or what we refer to as an open SD. If you receive an open SD, corrective action must be completed and documentation provided to TCEQ by the due date identified in that CARP. Now, the CARP itself typically has 3 different sections. You'll have the sanitary defects, the additional corrective actions, and those best management practices, and we'll dive into each one a little bit here. This is what you might see for an open sanitary defect. So at the top, you have your public water system information. This will be your PWS name and ID along with the triggering date for that assessment. Below that is the document submittal information. As I said, open SDs have corrective action deadlines, and documentation must be provided by either email or to our mailing address as listed here. Then at the bottom, that third box is the actual sanitary defect information. Just to note, it again tells you here that submittal is required, just as another reminder. And then the bold statement below that is the sanitary defect itself, and that will be followed up with a paragraph describing the findings, the corrective action required, and the documents that are required to close that out. And then additionally, over on the right side, you will find the due date for that corrective action. All right, here we have a closed sanitary defect. You'll notice it's missing that document submittal box because a closed sanitary defect has already been corrected, so you do not have to submit anything for it. So this slide otherwise looks fairly similar to the previous, with the exception that that description below the sanitary defect will include the corrective action taken. And on the right, you will have a completed date instead of a due date. All right, so these are some of the examples of sanitary defects that you might see. This is not an exhaustive list. Sanitary defects may be physical and allow contamination to enter the system through events such as line breaks or leaks. They may also be defects in the barriers against contamination, such as failure in disinfection equipment. And once again, I'm going to state, because it's so important, open sanitary defects have due dates for corrective action, and documents must be submitted. Systems will receive violations for not submitting that documentation on time. And documentation requested may include items such as residual records, photographs, repair receipts, etc. It'll list it in that sanitary defect. All right, the second section of the CARP is the additional corrective actions. This is what that section looks like. These are rule-based, and the associated rule will be cited in the findings section. And these items will be followed up with by the region during your next compliance investigation. There's no document submittal required. Here are some examples of additional corrective actions that you might see. Other items you may see are for tank inspections, for example, not maintaining tank inspections or not performing tank inspections at the appropriate frequency. You may also see items for facility approvals, such as an unapproved well that has been identified during the review process. And you may also see an item about operating records, for example, not keeping maintenance and repair records. The final section of the CARP is the best management practices, and these are recommendations for improvement. Here are some of the best management practices that we note more frequently. These are not rule-based, but they may affect the system's compliance. As an example, a thorough SOP will set a system up for successful sample collection. We often see incomplete SOPs or cases where a sampler is not following the SOP, and that's something that we will note in this best management practice section. Similarly, you want to ensure sample sites are adequate. This can help prevent triggering positive samples and getting an assessment. You also want to make sure the state's database, Drinking Water Watch, or soon to be Drinking Water Viewer, is up to date. If we notice that points of contact or facilities are not up to date, we will note that here. All right, so now that you know about the assessment process, let's move into talking about how to prevent one. You want to follow an up-to-date sample siting plan and sample collection SOP. Evaluate sample sites prior to sample collection, and if the site is no longer suitable, please refer to your SSP and choose a different site. As a reminder, the area surrounding a sample site should be sanitary, the site should be in regular use, an external tap should be used if available. You should be able to disinfect the tap, and the tap should be free of any attachments. You also want to monitor weather conditions prior to sample collection. If conditions are not suitable, you should delay your sampling. You want to avoid sampling from a site that is unsanitary, has a residual below the minimum, or has waterline construction, as all of these situations can lead to positive samples. You also want to make sure that every sampler is aware of repeat sampling requirements in the event of a positive sample. 3 repeats are always required, and you can always reach out to us if you have questions about that process. And to that point, you want to make sure you're maintaining open communication with both TCEQ and the lab so that we can make sure that everyone's on the same page with the repeat sampling process. Again, always feel free to reach out to us. All right, so some helpful documents. The TCEQ RTCR webpage has several guidance documents available. There's an example standard operating procedure for sample collection, MRF guidance, which Sarah went through, sample siting plan template. I strongly encourage everyone to read and be familiar with our regulatory guidance. That's the RG 421. It's a really great resource for RTCR requirements. I also recommend checking out our PWSSP webpage, which has great information for both laboratories and systems. The public can review public water system information in Drinking Water Watch. RTCR staff may be contacted at this phone number and email address. Additionally, you may request free on-site assistance from the FMT program. And I really encourage systems to reach out for this assistance. It's a really great resource. And with that, I just want to thank you all for being here today, and we will open the floor for questions.
I have one from someone online. The
you
question
repeat
is
that?
about slide 31, asks about plumbing work. And the question is that before the TC plus or in response to the TC plus?
Oh, so in the assessment, we're trying to identify the cause of positive samples, so it would be related to that positive event. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.